Okay, welcome back to my channel, all about book summaries. So, we now start with part 3, called Approaches to Different Kinds of Reading Matter. The book I'm working on is How to Read a Book by Mortimer J. Adler and Charles Van Doren. We start with chapter 13, How to Read Practical Books. And so begins part 3 of the book. The rules so far have been necessarily general, right? Applying especially to works of nonfiction. In the coming chapters, these rules will be revised and adapted to suit specific genres. Okay, this chapter, as the title insinuates, will deal with practical books, those that require you to take some form of action after reading and, of course, agreeing with them. All right. The first caveat regarding practical books is that on their own they cannot solve the problems they have brought forth. They merely help, but only through action can the reader ultimately decide if the solutions have truly been practical, i.e., applicable in every sense of the word. The final test of a practical book then does not dwell in a theoretical realm, but in the real world. I am reminded of a pearl of wisdom here by Alan Watts, and I paraphrase. A person who thinks of nothing but his or her own thoughts will end up with a distorted outlook on reality. The way I see it, we must not only think, but wherever possible, apply as well. Okay, an author, try as he or she will, cannot give you particular actions for your particular situations. You must take the general and convert it into something personal and practical. In addition, you must strive to read between the proverbial lines. Not everything can be stated explicitly. Okay? Some things must be inferred. Needless to say, this is important for at least two reasons. To decide whether or not you agree with the author's recommendations, and, assuming you do, determining where and how to apply them. Remember, you can agree with someone's logic, yet not reach the same conclusion. When reading practical works, and indeed arguably anything, you need to keep in mind that a writer usually wants you to be persuaded. And to do so, he or she needs to appeal to both your emotions and the more rational side of you. In essence, this is called propaganda, a term that has garnered negative connotations, especially after the mid 20th century, for reasons that should be obvious. But not all propaganda entails deception. In fact, most writers cannot do without it. It is only when an author's true intentions are masked or otherwise distorted that a reader has the right to claim that he or she has been maliciously misled. But otherwise, it does not serve your best interest to resist everything all the time. Okay? That would simply mean that there's no need to read practical books. It is a delicate balance, okay? Being vigilant yet open minded at the same time. No easy task. Lastly, and this is especially true when reading practical books, the author's outlook on his or her subject and any significant events that make up his or her historical background are important. Okay, although many schools of thought have turned away from this, stating that only the words and ideas themselves are what matter, regardless of who wrote them. Um, anyway, I don't want to go into this. Okay, where I stand and why. Okay, I can only point this out here because a debate of this sort is beyond the scope of this summary. Okay. Now let us visit the 4 questions that we had talked about from the start. The first one, what is the book about, remains unchanged. Okay, given that expository works are structured, it is imperative to form some manner of outline while reading them. Okay, in a practical work, perhaps the most important aspect to focus on is what is or are the author's problem or problems. Okay, to know what to apply and how to apply it, you need to know what it applies to. The second question, the one dealing with terms, propositions, and arguments, also remains largely unchanged. Okay. The third question, is it true, is mostly the domain of theoretical works, where you compare the author's propositions to your own experiences. it is still important to ask this question about a practical book. But in this case, your focus is on the ends an author proposes. Okay? And your task is to gauge whether his or her methods are the best ones to reach such ends. The last question is, what of it? Here, if you agree with a practical book, some action on your part is required. Otherwise, your reading efforts will have been in vain. In other words, if the answer to question 3 is yes, i.e., it is true, then your task is how do I apply what to where, and when do I apply it? Okay? To do this, you must both agree with the author and accept his or her rationale. There are several reasons why readers of practical books may not change their actions, despite agreeing and accepting the propositions involved. Some of these are the following. They may be too lazy or tired to take action. They may think they have understood when in fact they haven't. Or they may believe that it's not their prerogative, right? That the call to action falls on someone else's shoulders. And that's the end of chapter 13.